What's the most hypocritical thing your estranged parents have ever done? I, 30F, know this sounds terrible. I know how it looks when someone says they don't talk to their sick parents, but I've never told the full story about why I went no contact 6 years ago. Everyone thinks it was just about money and a house. It wasn't. The house thing was just the final straw. My parents wanted a son, not in that, oh, we were hoping for a boy, but we love our daughter way. I mean, they genuinely saw me as a consolation prize from the moment I was born. My dad used to say it outright when he was frustrated with me. If you were a boy, you'd understand this. My mom was more subtle, but equally brutal. You're just too sensitive, Ginny. Boys don't overthink everything like you do. I remember being 7 and asking if I could take dance classes. All my friends were doing ballet. My mom looked at my dad and sighed. We already signed her up for Little League. Maybe next year. Next year never came. Instead, I spent 3 miserable seasons striking out while my dad yelled instructions from the sidelines like I was the son he never had. When I finally quit, he didn't speak to me for a week. The worst part was family gatherings. My cousins Duke and Ronnie, my uncle's boys, were golden children. Every conversation revolved around their baseball stats, their grades, their college plans. When Duke got into state on a partial baseball scholarship, my dad practically cried with pride. When I graduated summa cum laude from the same school 2 years later, he shook my hand and said, "Good for you, kiddo." I thought I was being dramatic. I thought all parents had favorites. But then Ronnie started working at my dad's company after college, and suddenly every dinner conversation was about how sons just understand business differently, and how it's natural for boys to want to take care of their parents when they get older. The implication was crystal clear. Daughters leave, sons stay, sons matter. My mom never contradicted him. If anything, she encouraged it. She'd nod along when he talked about how Ronnie was such a good son for checking in on my uncle every week. Meanwhile, I was living at home, paying rent, helping with groceries, and apparently invisible. I can see the pattern so clearly now. Every achievement I had was minimized. Every time I needed support, I was told I was being too needy or too emotional. But whenever they needed something from me, money, help with technology, someone to drive them to appointments, suddenly I was family again. The house situation 6 years ago wasn't really about the house. It was about them finally getting rid of the daughter they never wanted in the first place. They had spent 24 years making me feel like a burden, and when I was finally old enough to be discarded, they planned to do it in the cruelest way possible. I was 24, working retail part-time, living at home while I job hunted for something better than minimum wage. I paid them $400 a month in rent, which was a huge chunk of my income, plus I helped with groceries and utilities. I thought I was being responsible. I thought they appreciated having me contribute to the household while I got my life together. For months before I found out, they'd been acting weird, whispering conversations that stopped when I walked in, real estate brochures hidden in my dad's car, my mom asking strange questions about my relationship with my boyfriend Luke. Would I ever move in with him? Did I see a future there? Was I happy living at home forever? The day I found out, I came home early with a migraine. Their car was in the driveway, but the house seemed quiet. I was heading upstairs to my room when I heard them talking in their bedroom. At first, I thought it was about bills or work. Then I realized they were talking about me. "She's 24, Robert. She can't live with us forever." My mom's voice, clear as day through their thin bedroom door. "But what if she can't find anywhere to go?" My dad sounded worried, but not the kind of worried you'd expect from a parent concerned about their child's well-being. "That's not our problem anymore. We've supported her long enough. She takes advantage of our generosity." They had already accepted an offer on the house. Closing was in 45 days. They'd put a deposit on a 1-bedroom condo across town. They planned to tell me after everything was finalized, so I couldn't guilt them into changing their minds. I stood on those stairs for 20 minutes, listening to them discuss me like I was a stray cat they'd been feeding out of pity. The $400 I scraped together every month, that was nothing to them. The help with groceries, the rides to appointments when their car was in the shop, the tech support, the company during family dinners. All of it was just me, taking advantage. But here's the part that broke me. My mom said, "We should have put our foot down years ago. If we'd had a son, this wouldn't even be an issue. Sons understand when it's time to be independent." 6 years later, I'm married to Luke now. We have a nice apartment, stable jobs, a good life. My parents weren't invited to our wedding. They didn't ask to be. We've spoken maybe 6 times in the past 3 years. Always brief, always awkward. I thought that was the end of it. I thought I'd finally escape the feeling of never being good enough, never being the child they actually wanted. Then 3 months ago, my mom called. She sounded different. Older. Tired. "Your father's been having some health issues," she said, like we talked every week. Like she hadn't spent decades making me feel unwanted. Like she hadn't planned to abandon me 6 years ago without even the courtesy of a conversation. "Oh," I said. I didn't ask what kind of health issues. I didn't offer to help. I just waited. "We're not getting any younger, Ginny, and family is supposed to help family." The audacity was breathtaking. After everything they'd put me through, after years of making it clear I was the wrong gender to be their real child, after planning to dump me like unwanted furniture, now I was family again. Now they needed something from me. I know how this makes me sound. I know what people think when they hear someone won't help their sick parents. But they don't know the whole story. They don't know what it's like to spend your entire childhood and early adulthood feeling like you're not enough, like you're the consolation prize, like your parents are just counting down the days until they can be done with you. And now that those days have come and gone, now that they're facing the reality of aging without the son they always wished they'd had instead of me, suddenly I'm supposed to forget everything and become the dutiful daughter they never wanted in the first place. Luke says I don't owe them anything. That obligation goes both ways, and they failed me first. But some nights I lie awake wondering if I'm being petty, if I'm holding grudges that should be forgiven, if blood really is thicker than water, no matter how poisoned that blood might be. Then I remember being 7 years old, striking out at baseball while my dad shook his head in disappointment. I remember being 24, standing on those stairs, hearing my mother wish I had been born a boy, and I think maybe, just maybe, it's okay to protect the peace I've finally found. That first phone call from my mom was just the beginning. What started as one awkward conversation about Dad's health issues quickly became the manipulation that made me realize nothing had really changed about who they were. The calls started coming every few days, always from Mom, always with updates about Dad that got progressively more detailed and guilt-inducing. First, it was just diabetes complications. Then it was his blood sugar crashes, and he needs help with his insulin. Within 2 weeks, she was describing infected wounds on his feet and how he was too proud to let her help him with basic care. "I'm not as young as I used to be either, Ginny," she'd say, her voice taking on this fragile quality I'd never heard before. "Sometimes I wonder what we'll do if things get worse." I wanted to ask where this concern had been 6 years ago, when they were planning to dump me without warning, but I bit my tongue and made non-committal sounds while she painted increasingly dire pictures of their situation. Then Luke answered one of her calls when I was in the shower. I came out to find him looking confused and slightly angry. "Your mom wants my opinion on something," he said, handing me the phone. "She thinks I might have more influence over your decisions than you do." Mom launched into this whole speech about how young couples need to make decisions together and how Luke surely understood that family obligations were important for building character in a marriage. She was trying to recruit my husband to pressure me into helping them. Luke just listened for a while before saying, "Lav, I think Ginny can make her own decisions about her relationship with you. She's told me the history. I support whatever she chooses." The line went quiet for a long moment. Then Mom's voice changed completely. Gone was the fragile, aging woman act. "Well, I hope you understand what kind of person you married, Luke. Ginny has always been selfish. Even as a child, she only cared about herself." That's when I knew the mask was coming off. The calls escalated after that. Mom started describing Dad's condition in gruesome detail. His infected toe, how he cried when she had to change his bandages, how scared he was about potentially losing his foot. She painted pictures of him sitting alone in their small condo, staring at the walls, wondering why his only child had abandoned him. "He asks about you sometimes," she said during one particularly manipulative call. "He wonders what he did wrong. I don't have the heart to tell him that some children just don't have it in them to care." I hung up on her that time, but she called back an hour later, crying. "I'm sorry, honey. I'm just so stressed. The doctors think I might have something wrong with my lungs, and with Dad being sick, I can't handle this alone. We don't have anyone else." That stopped me cold. "What do you mean, your lungs?" "Probably nothing. Just some spots on a scan. But they want to do more tests, and the appointments are so expensive, and I'm scared, Ginny. I'm really scared." For the first time since this whole thing started, I felt genuine sympathy for her. Whatever our history, the idea of my mom having cancer was terrifying. Despite everything, she was still my mom. "What kind of tests?" I asked. "A biopsy. And if it's what they think it might be, treatment could be extensive. We have insurance, but it doesn't cover everything. And with Dad needing so much care, I don't know how we'll manage." That night, Luke and I had our first real fight about my parents since they'd come back into my life. "She's manipulating you," he said. "Can't you see that? First it was your dad's diabetes, now suddenly she has lung spots. It's textbook emotional manipulation." "What if it's real, though?" I shot back. "What if she actually has cancer and I just ignore it? What kind of person does that make me?" "The kind of person who learned not to trust people who have spent 30 years proving they can't be trusted." He was right, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being heartless. When Mom called the next day with the biopsy results, early-stage lung cancer, treatable but requiring chemotherapy, I felt like the worst daughter in the world. "The oncologist says I have a good prognosis," she said, but her voice was small and scared. "But the treatments are going to make me so tired, and with Dad needing help, I just don't know how we'll cope. We're all alone, Ginny. We don't have anyone." That phrase, "we don't have anyone," kept echoing in my head, because it was true, wasn't it? They'd made that choice by pushing away the one child they had. But now that choice was coming back to haunt them, and somehow I was supposed to fix it. The calls became daily after that. Sometimes from Mom, sometimes Dad would get on the line, his voice weaker than I remembered, talking about how hard it was to manage his medication schedule when Mom was at chemo appointments, how they couldn't afford to hire help, how other families had children who visited, who brought groceries, who cared. "I see these other patients at the treatment center," Mom said during one call. Their daughters drive them to appointments, sit with them during infusions. Some of them bring their grandchildren to visit. It makes me sad, watching all that love and support, knowing we don't have that. The guilt was crushing, but underneath it was this rage that I couldn't shake. Where had their love and support been when I needed it? When I was a kid desperately trying to be good enough for them? When I was 24 and struggling to get my life together? Luke started answering more of their calls when I couldn't handle it. He'd take messages, relay information, but he drew the line at anything that felt like emotional manipulation. They called 3 times today. He'd tell me when I got home from work. Your mom wants you to know that your dad fell yesterday and she couldn't lift him up by herself. She had to call 911. Is he okay? He's fine. But she made sure to mention that the EMTs asked if they had any family who could check on them more regularly. It was during one of these relayed conversations that Mom dropped the bombshell that changed everything. She wants to know about your work schedule, Luke said, looking uncomfortable, and whether you could potentially take some time off. She says they need more than just phone calls now. Time off for what? To help them set up care routines, drive them to appointments. She mentioned something about them needing daily check-ins and how it would just be temporary until they get back on their feet. The audacity was breathtaking. 6 years ago, they couldn't wait to get rid of me. Now they expected me to put my life on hold to become their live-in caregiver. But when I called Mom back to clarify what exactly she was asking for, her response floored me. We're not asking you to move back in, Ginny. We know you have your own life now. But maybe just weekends, or a few evenings a week? Other children do this for their parents. It's normal. It's what family does. Other children, who hadn't been emotionally neglected and then planned to be abandoned, I thought but didn't say. I have a job, Mom, and a marriage. I can't just— Of course your job is more important than your dying parents, she interrupted, her voice turning sharp. I should have expected this from you. The answer came 3 days later when I missed one of Mom's calls because I was in a work meeting. She left a voicemail that Luke played for me when I got home. Ginny, this is your mother. I can't believe you're too busy to answer your phone when your father and I are going through the worst time of our lives. I guess we know where we stand in your priorities. Your father wanted to call you himself, but I told him not to bother. Clearly, you've made your choice about what kind of daughter you want to be. Luke looked at me after the message ended. Still think she's just scared and reaching out for help? I didn't answer, but something inside me was starting to harden again. That tone, that accusation, that assumption that I owed them availability on demand. It was exactly the same energy they'd had when I was growing up. I decided to send them money, not because I forgave them or wanted a relationship, but because I couldn't live with myself if they actually died from lack of medical care while I had the means to help. Luke and I talked it over for hours, and we agreed on a monthly amount that would cover their medical expenses without putting a strain on our own finances. I calculated it carefully. Their insurance covered most treatments, but copays, medications, and medical supplies added up. I figured $800 a month would handle the gaps and give them some breathing room for things like transportation to appointments or hiring someone to help with Dad's wound care when Mom was too tired from chemo. I sent the first check with a note. This is to help with medical expenses. I hope it makes things easier for you both. Mom called the day they received it. For a moment, I thought she might actually say thank you. $800? She said instead. Ginny, honey, I don't think you understand how expensive everything is. Dad's insulin alone costs $300 a month after insurance. Then there's my chemo copays, his wound care supplies, the special diabetic food he needs. $800 barely covers half of what we're spending. I felt that familiar knot forming in my stomach. Mom, it's what we can afford to help with. Luke and I have our own bills. Other children don't nickel and dime their parents' medical care, she interrupted. My friend Janet's daughter pays for a private nurse twice a week. That's what children do when they love their parents. The second month, I sent the same amount. This time, Dad called. Sweetheart, he said, and his voice did sound weaker than before. We're grateful for the help, we really are. But we were hoping— Well, your mother's treatments are taking everything out of her. She can barely get to the grocery store, let alone help me with my foot care. We were wondering if maybe you could visit once a week, just for a few hours, to help with some of the things she can't manage anymore. Dad, I work full-time, and it's a 40-minute drive each way to your place. Other people make time for family, he said. And there it was again. Other people. Other children. The same comparison game they'd played my entire life. By the third month, the complaints were constant. The money wasn't enough. The visits they weren't getting were making them feel abandoned. Mom's cancer support group kept asking where her daughter was, and she was embarrassed to admit I never came to appointments. Do you know how that feels? She asked during one particularly guilt-heavy phone call. Sitting in that chemo chair, watching other women get visited by their daughters, having to tell people that mine is too busy to come, it's humiliating, Ginny. That's when Luke started getting frustrated. They're not using the money for medical expenses, he pointed out after overhearing one of these calls. $800 should more than cover their copays. I think they're pocketing most of it and complaining to get more. He was probably right, but what was I supposed to do? Demand receipts, audit their spending? The whole situation made me feel sick. Then they showed up at our apartment. I was coming home from work on a Thursday evening, exhausted from a particularly stressful day, when I saw them sitting in our building's lobby. Dad was in a wheelchair, which was new, and Mom looked frailer than I'd ever seen her, wearing a headscarf that barely covered her thinning hair. I realized they'd been waiting. Our building requires keycard access, so they couldn't get upstairs, but they could sit in the lobby and wait for me to come home, which is exactly what they'd done. "How did you get my address?" was the first thing out of my mouth. "Does it matter?" Mom said, struggling to stand up. "We needed to see you, to talk to you properly, not just over the phone." "Ginny," Dad said from the wheelchair, "we need to discuss this situation like adults." "This isn't the place for this conversation," I said. "Then invite us upstairs," Mom said. "We're family. We should be able to visit our daughter's home." "No," I said simply. Dad's face crumpled like I'd slapped him. "Sweetheart, we're sick. We drove all the way here because we needed to see you. Can't we just sit down and talk?" "How did you get my address?" I asked again. Mom's expression hardened. "We hired someone to find you. We had to. You've made yourself impossible to reach when we need you." They'd hired a private investigator to find their own daughter, the daughter they'd planned to abandon without warning 6 years earlier. "You need to leave," I said. "We're not leaving until we talk," Mom said, her voice getting louder. "We're your parents. We're sick. We need help, and you're sending us scraps like we're charity cases instead of family." $800 a month is not scraps, I said, trying to keep my voice down. "It's not enough," Dad said, and his voice carried across the lobby. "Do you know what we're going through? Do you care at all?" "I know exactly what you're going through," I said, my voice getting harder. "I went through it 6 years ago when you planned to throw me out without even telling me, when you decided I wasn't worth keeping around because I wasn't the son you wanted." Mom's face flushed. "That's ancient history, Ginny. We're talking about now, about us being sick and needing our daughter. You're talking about needing someone to take care of you. That's not the same thing as needing your daughter." "What kind of daughter abandons her dying parents?" Dad asked, his voice breaking. "The kind whose parents abandoned her first," I shot back. Mom straightened up, and for a moment, I saw a flash of the woman who'd spent my childhood making me feel inadequate. "Fine," she said. "If that's how you want to be, then you should know we've talked to a lawyer. There are laws about elder neglect, Ginny. We know where you work. We know you can afford to help us properly, and if you won't do it voluntarily, maybe you'll do it legally." The threat hung in the air like smoke. "We should have had a son instead," she added, just loud enough for everyone to hear. "A son would never treat his parents this way." Dad looked embarrassed by her outburst, but he didn't contradict her. He never had. They left after that, Mom pushing Dad's wheelchair with more strength than she'd pretended to have, both of them muttering loud enough for me to hear about ungrateful children and what the world was coming to. That night, Luke held me while I cried angry tears. Not for my parents, but for the little girl I'd been who'd spent so many years trying to earn love from people who decided before I was born that I'd never be enough. "We're calling a lawyer tomorrow," he said into my hair. "We need to know what they can and can't do legally." I nodded against his chest, because if they wanted to play hardball, I was done playing defense. "Let me be very clear," my lawyer said after reviewing everything. "Adult children have no legal obligation to provide care or financial support to their parents unless they've accepted legal guardianship or power of attorney. Elder neglect laws apply to professional caregivers or people who have voluntarily taken on caretaking responsibilities. You can't be sued for refusing to be your parent's caregiver." "What about the money I've been sending?" I asked. "That was voluntary. You can stop anytime, but I'd recommend documenting everything going forward. If they continue to harass you at work or your home, that could constitute stalking or harassment." My lawyer helped us draft a certified letter outlining exactly what I would and wouldn't provide. Monthly medical expense assistance of $800, no visits, no phone calls beyond emergency medical notifications, and a clear statement that any further harassment would result in cessation of all assistance and potential legal action. We sent it that Friday. The response was swift and ugly. Monday morning, my boss called me into her office. "Ginny, I had an interesting phone call this morning from someone claiming to be your mother. She wanted to discuss your character and whether we knew we'd hired someone who abandons sick family members." "I'm so sorry. We're dealing with some family issues." I figured as much. I told her that employees' personal lives weren't up for discussion and that any further calls would be considered harassment of our workplace. My boss leaned forward. "But between us, you might want to get ahead of this if it's going to continue." That afternoon, Luke called. They tried the same thing at my office. My manager was less polite about it. The voicemail started that evening. Dad, sounding weaker than before. "Ginny, honey, we don't understand why you're being so cruel. We're sick. We need you." Then Mom, her voice sharp with rage. "You're throwing away your only parents for what? Pride?" Your father cried after that lawyer letter arrived. "I hope you're happy." But the most revealing message came 3 days later, when Mom apparently forgot she was leaving a voicemail. "Robert, she's not going to cave. We need to find another way to get more money out of her. Maybe if we—" Then the message cut off abruptly. Luke played it back twice. "They're not even pretending this is about love anymore. 2 weeks after the lawyer letter, I got a call from my Aunt Carol, Dad's sister who lived across the country. We'd never been close, but she was the one who'd reached out during my parents' guilt campaign to lecture me about family duty. "Ginny," she said, her voice hesitant, "I think I owe you an apology." That was unexpected. "Okay." "Your mother called me last week asking for money, said you'd cut them off completely and they couldn't afford Dad's medical care. She wanted me to send them $2,000 for some emergency treatment." I felt cold. "What did you tell her?" I said I'd think about it, but something felt off, so I called their insurance company directly. I'm still listed as Dad's emergency contact from years ago. "Ginny, their medical bills are almost completely covered. Between insurance and what you're sending them, they have more than enough for their care." The pieces clicked into place. They've been lying. About more than just the money. I called around to some cousins, and apparently your mom's been telling everyone that you refuse to help at all, that you won't even send money, let alone visit. She's been playing the victim to everyone while cashing your checks. They weren't just manipulating me, they were running a con on the entire extended family, using me as the villain in their story while secretly taking my money. That night, Luke and I made a decision. We drafted another letter, this one stating that we discovered their misrepresentation of our assistance to other family members, and that their continued harassment had forced us to cease all financial support effective immediately. We sent copies to my Aunt Carol and Uncle Dave, Dad's brother, along with documentation of every payment I'd made. I wanted the family to know the truth before my parents could spin another sob story. The response was silence. For 2 blissful weeks, no calls, no voicemails, no workplace harassment. I started to think they'd finally given up. Then Carol called again. "Your father's in the hospital," she said. "Heart episode, but he's stable. Your mother called asking family to contribute to medical bills they can't afford. And I told her the family had a conference call after your letters. We decided that if Robert needs help beyond what insurance covers, we'll pay the hospital directly. We're not giving them cash anymore." It turns out that once the extended family learned my parents had been lying about my involvement, their sympathy dried up quickly. Uncle Dave had apparently been contributing $500 a month for 6 months, thinking I was refusing to help at all. Cousin Duke had sent them $1,200 for Dad's emergency foot surgery that turned out to be routine outpatient care. The family's response was swift and brutal. They created a shared fund for actual medical emergencies, with payments going directly to healthcare providers. No more cash handouts, no more sob stories without verification. Mom tried calling me once after Dad got out of the hospital. "Your father could have died," she said, "and you weren't even there. What if those had been his last days?" "Then he would have died knowing exactly how much I cared about him," I replied. "The same amount he cared about me when I was 24 and you were planning to abandon me." She hung up. That was 8 months ago. Through Carol, I learned that Dad's health actually improved significantly once they could afford proper care, which they always could. They just wanted extra money for comfort. Mom finished her chemo treatment successfully. They hired a part-time aide with the money they'd been scamming from family members, and their quality of life is apparently much better. They just can't afford the lifestyle they'd hoped to guilt and manipulate their way into. Luke and I moved to a new apartment with better security 6 months ago. We're expecting our first baby in the spring. My parents don't know about either development, and they never will. Sometimes I wonder if I'll regret this when they're actually dying. But then I remember that little girl striking out at baseball while her father shook his head in disappointment. I remember standing on those stairs 6 years ago, listening to them plan my abandonment. I remember that voicemail where Mom forgot she was being recorded. Some people never change, even when they're sick and scared. They just get more desperate in their manipulation. I chose my peace over their approval, and I've never slept better. The karma they received wasn't some dramatic cosmic justice. It was simply the natural consequence of burning every bridge they'd spent decades building. When they finally needed family support, they discovered that love and loyalty have to be earned, not demanded. And after 30 years of being the disappointment, I'm finally okay with being the daughter who said no.